Hello, friends. My name is Ty, and I'm going to read to you. I've decided that over the next few videos, well, probably more than a few videos, I'm going to read my first novel, entitled The Watch, published by the good folks at Dark Dragon Publishing out of Toronto. I really enjoyed writing this book. It was my first ever novel that I finished, and then the first ever novel that I was published. It's about 85,000 words, so it's going to take us a while to get through, but I'll do over a course of several videos. One thing I did want to add is I don't edit these videos at all. My intention here is to have a sit down with you and me, and anybody who wants a free story can come and get one. I don't edit them. It's just I hit record, I do my thing, and then I post it online for anybody who wants to watch it. If you don't like that, then you don't have to watch them. But if you do like it, and you like the stories, and you like hanging out with me, I really appreciate you being here. So let's get started. Let me start with dedication. For the men and women who walk the thin blue line. And then the acknowledgements. There are two people who have influenced my writing life more than any others. Casey Dyer, who has been a source of friendship, guidance, support, love, and above all, belief. And to my dear uncle, Jack White, who first taught me the importance of learning the language, and then taught me it's okay for a man to be a man. And not to be forgotten, to Kathy Chung and all the staff and volunteers who make the Surrey International Writers Conference possible. Without you, the conference would not go on, and without the conference, I would not have had the tools to write this book. Another caveat is, I wrote this book 12 years ago. No, wait a minute. I wrote this book 15 years ago and it was published 13 years ago. So some details have changed within the policing world. So I'm going to read it as it was first written, bearing in mind the context that the information in some of these things is a little bit dated. But there you have it. And here we go. Constable Quinn Sullivan crouched behind the engine compartment of an ancient Ford truck and scrabbled at his duty belt for a full pistol magazine. Dropping the spent magazine from his gun, he slammed the new one into place and racked the action to load the bullet into the chamber. He gritted his teeth and hunched his shoulders as he heard a blast of automatic gunfire and the thud of bullets punching into the side panel of the old Ford. He took a deep breath and tried to stop himself from shaking, gripping the pistol in both hands as he'd been trained, then popped up and fired 3 rapid shots at the deranged man across the parking lot. Quinn was a good shot. All 3 bullets hit the screaming vagrant in the torso, and the hollow point rounds did not even make the man flinch. He continued to fire his fully automatic pistol in Quinn's direction. Quinn ducked down again, cursing, his heartbeat thumping somewhere in the back of his skull, as more bullets slammed into the truck, sending showers of broken glass into the air and onto the back of his neck. Why wasn't the guy going down? He asked himself in his reeling mind. He grabbed the shoulder microphone of his portable radio and screamed into it for a second time. Resolution, this is Charlie 1. I'm 1033. I've got shots fired and I need some goddamn cover. 1033. The code for a cop in distress would bring his watchmates running, and hopefully they were quick about it. The call had been routine. An aggressive panhandler in the mall parking lot, bothering people. Quinn had arrived and saw Scooby, a local homeless man who derived his name from the giant purple Scooby-Doo doll that he had strapped to the handlebars of his bike. Despite the fact he was deeply schizophrenic and had losing arguments with trees, Scooby was generally good-natured and posed no danger to anyone. Quinn had spoken to him dozens of times in the 6 months since he'd moved to British Columbia's Central Coast and been posted to Resolution Detachment. The man had never been anything but kind, albeit a little confused. But today, as soon as Quinn pulled his marked vehicle into the parking lot, Scooby had pulled a black machine pistol from the depths of his filthy overcoat and strafed Quinn's car with bullets. Blaring sirens announced the arrival of backup. A white Ford Crown Victoria with the emblem of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on the side drifted around the corner of the main street and into the small parking lot. Dave McLeod, Quinn's friend and partner, skidded to a stop behind the truck, threw open the driver's door of the cruiser, and dived onto the ground as Scooby fired wildly. Several bullets hit the side window of Dave's car and more glass littered the concrete. What the fuck, man? Dave shouted as he crawled up to Quinn and took cover beside him. Is that Scooby? Quinn nodded. I don't know what happened. He started shooting as soon as I got here. Are you hit? No, but I think he dropped a couple people at the shoe store. There was a momentary lull in the gunfire, and Quinn heard the clatter of an empty magazine hitting the ground. He's empty, Quinn said. On me, now. He ducked around the front of the Ford in a crouch, pistol held at eye level. He did not have to look back to know Dave was on his heels. Scooby was furiously trying to get a full magazine out of his tattered coat, looking down as he dug in his pockets. "Drop the gun, Scooby!" Quinn yelled, his voice hoarse and jagged. Scooby glanced up, a snarl twisting his grizzled, unshaven face, and then he went back to work. He had a magazine in his hand now and was trying to fit it into the handle of the machine pistol. "I said drop it, Scooby!" Quinn yelled. "Do it now! I don't want to shoot you!" Scooby screamed in reply. He finally fitted the magazine into the gun and closed the action, chambering a bullet. As he brought the gun up in the direction of the Mounties, both Quinn and Dave opened fire. "How many bullets did you fire, Constable?" Quinn looked up at the Major Crime Sergeant, who stood over him in a cheap suit, a large black notebook in hand. I'm not sure, Sarge," Quinn replied, trying to remember the man's name. I emptied my first mag at him when he started shooting, and I don't know if I hit him or not. Then I think I fired 3 more rounds before Dave got here, and 5 more before Scooby finally dropped." "You think?" "Yeah, it happened in kind of a big fucking hurry, so I wasn't actually counting my rounds." The sergeant closed his notebook with a snap and held up his hands in a gesture of placation. "Don't get defensive. I'm just trying to get the details down." The sergeant fell silent as a massive, hairy-knuckled hand clamped down on his shoulder. Corporal Charles Rafe spun the man around and looked down on him. "How about you give the boy a couple of minutes of peace before you start interrogating him?" Rafe, Quinn's boss, was a giant of a man, and despite being a lower rank, commanded the sergeant's attention by sheer physical presence. The sergeant nodded. "Yeah, okay, Rafe. I'm not here to hurt your guy. It looks like a justified shoot. But we need to get a statement soon, all right?" Rafe smoothed his thick black handlebar mustache with thumb and forefinger. "I'll see that he comes to see you as soon as he's had some rest and spoken to a division representative." "Well, fair enough," the smaller man said, and walked over to a cluster of other plainclothes investigators who had been called to the scene. Rafe turned back to Quinn. "You all right, son?" Rafe considered the constables who worked for him as his children. He also had very little tolerance for anyone who had given up the uniform for a suit and tie. He glared at the huddled group of major crime investigators. "You don't need to talk to that desk jockey right now if you don't want to. I know this sucks. And if he or any of those other ass clowns give you any trouble, let me know and I'll handle it." "In the 5 years I worked in Surrey, I never got shot at, once," Quinn said. As he stood up from the car bumper he'd been sitting on, he ran the fingers of one hand through his short hair, catching several shards of the same broken glass that littered the ground. "I've been in Resolution Cove for 6 months, and this is the second time. The second time in, less than 2 weeks? I know this is what I signed up for, but it isn't nearly as much fun as they made it sound in the brochures." Days before Scooby shot up the strip mall, a kid from the local high school had lost his marbles and brought his father's gun to math class. He had wounded 2 students and killed the school janitor before the Mounties arrived. Just like with Scooby, there was no talking to the kid. He refused to put the gun down and kept shooting, and Quinn had no choice but to kill him. The last thing any cop wanted to do was take a life, and now Quinn had done it twice. Rafe reached out an arm as thick as a coffee can and wrapped it around Quinn's neck, pulling him close. "This is not your fault, son," the burly corporal said, his mustache tickling Quinn's cheek, his aftershave filling Quinn's nostrils. "If you hadn't put Scooby down, he would have killed you or someone else. We're lucky he only wounded that lady." Quinn looked over to where a pool of blood lay in front of a store. A young mother, out shopping while her kids were at school, took a bullet in the shoulder and another in the wrist as she stepped out into the parking lot when Scooby started shooting at Quinn. "How is she?" Quinn asked. "She's going to need some surgery to patch up the bullet holes and years of counseling to ease the nightmares, but she'll be fine." "Did anyone else get hit?" Dave McLeod asked as he walked up to Quinn and Rafe. Dave had bandages around both his lean forearms where he had torn off several layers of skin while diving from his car. "No," Rafe said, shaking his bald head. "All the employees in the stores hid once Scooby started shooting, although they're going to be pulling Quinn's bullets out of the drywall for the rest of the week." Quinn crossed his arms and looked away, embarrassed. When the homeless man had started shooting, he had pulled his own gun and cranked off shots in Scooby's general direction as he dove for cover. I'm probably lucky I didn't hit any bystanders myself." Dave clapped him on the arm. and showed him a broad, even-toothed smile. "Don't worry about it, dude. If I'd been first on scene, I'd have promptly hidden under my car and shit my pants. You'd have had to pull me out when you came to save me." "Where did Scooby learn how to use a fully automatic weapon?" Quinn asked, trying to change the subject. "More importantly, where in the Sam fuck did he get a gun like that?" Dave asked, as he reached up one bandaged hand to brush the glass still stuck in his short, black hair. "That's a serious piece of hardware. A full-auto Glock, 40 cal, with a 30-round magazine and a compensator. That's a grade far above the run-of-the-mill pea shooter we usually find in Resolution." Dave was previously in the military and an avid gun enthusiast, and he had a good look at Scooby's pistol after it had been seized by the major crime investigators. "That's the kind of gun you use to invade a small country, not finding a crazy homeless guy." "I don't know, boys," Rafe said. "But those aren't questions we're going to answer by standing out here in the cold." Quinn looked up at the gray sky and rubbed his own arms. It was barely the 1st of October, and the weather had already turned frosty and miserable. Bloody coastal towns. "You boys get back to the office and write up your occurrence reports," Rafe said. "Then you can go home. Steve is calling in a couple of guys from A-Watch to cover the rest of your shift." Quinn nodded, knowing that Staff Sergeant Steve Falk, who was in charge of the administration and operations of the Resolution Cove detachment, would see what they were taking care of. "Quinn," Rafe said, "you ride with me. Dave will meet you back at the house." Quinn looked over at his car. The windshield was riddled with bullet holes and the front tires were flat. It would not be driving on its own steam any time soon. "Oh, okay, boss." As Quinn was climbing into the passenger side of the Chevy Suburban that served as the supervisor's vehicle, he saw a figure at the barrier of the crime scene tape, and he paused, standing on the running board of the truck. An attractive woman, maybe in her 40s, with a huge mop of blonde hair tied back with a scarf, stood looking at Quinn. He was sure he recognized her, and looked back, their eyes meeting for a moment. The place where he had seen her before moved through his mind, just out of grasp of his consciousness, and he struggled to remember. She was watching him, her gaze intense, to the point where it made him uncomfortable. He turned to Rafe. "Hey, boss, do you know how that woman is?" Rafe looked over at Quinn, over the roof of the truck. "Oh, what woman?" Quinn jerked his chin towards the blonde woman. "Her." Don't know her. Probably some looky-loo trying to get a peek at a crime scene. I'm sure I've seen her somewhere before, I just don't know where from. You know, like deja vu." Rafe looked at him skeptically. "Deja vu. You're not losing your shit on me, are you, son? Maybe all this crap in the last couple of weeks has shaken something loose in your head. We better make you an appointment to see the force shrink." The big man climbed into the truck, making the springs squeak, and slammed the door. Quinn looked back to the edge of the crime scene. The blonde woman was still there. She looked at Quinn for another moment, and turned and walked down the sidewalk. Quinn watched her go as he climbed into the truck and pulled the door closed. It stabbed at him that he didn't know who she was, since their face was so poignantly familiar. He was still trying to remember as Rafe dropped the Suburban into gear and drove out of the parking lot. Resolution Cove was a moderate-sized community on the central coast of British Columbia, in the Caribou-Chilcotin region. The town had started out as a tiny fishing village at the mouth of the river's inlet, and had blasted, literally overnight, into a relative metropolis when gold was discovered in the surrounding mountains in the late 1800s. The gold vein had eventually been tapped out, and fishing and logging became the main industries, with tourism doubling the population during the summer months. Quinn had completed his first 5 years of service in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Surrey Detachment, the largest in Canada. Like most people sent to Surrey, he'd been voluntold to go. And once his first 5 years were up, and he could be released from his posting and start looking for other places to work. He had talked to the detachment staffing members and placed a request for a transfer on his file. It wasn't that he minded working in Surrey, but he found himself getting restless working in the same place, seeing the same faces and hauling the same assholes to jail, and he was ready for a change. Only weeks after he made it known he was ready to move, a corporal from the staffing unit had called and offered him Resolution Cove, as they were short members and urgently needed an experienced constable. He had heard that Resolution was a sleepy tourist town and thought it would be a good place to decompress for a couple of years before looking for another transfer. He had accepted without hesitation. He quickly discovered that Resolution's reputation as sleepy was not at all deserved. It was a small town with big city crime, and the RCMP detachment, with a complement of less than 30 members, was sorely undermanned and overworked. Quinn did not mind being busy. He had not joined the force to sit on his ass, eat donuts, and take the Queen's dime. But all the members in the detachment were run ragged, and he was getting tired of getting shot at. The media would have people believe that Syria was the asshole of the world, with more crime and more violence than any other city, but in 5 years working there, he had never been shot at. In Resolution, people had tried, with great sincerity, to kill him twice in the last 6 months. Resolution's detachment sat beside the City Hall and the attached courthouse on the corner of 3rd Avenue and 25th Street, at the north end of the city, a few blocks away from the waterfront. As Rafe pulled into the parking lot, Quinn saw a tall, thin Mountie standing outside the back door of his detachment waiting for them. Staff Sergeant Steve Falk grabbed Quinn's hand as he got out of the truck. "How you doing, pal? You okay?" The lines around his eyes deepened as he looked at Quinn, concerned. "Yeah, Staff, I'm fine," Quinn replied. "A little tired, I guess." "Just the adrenaline dump," Steve Falk said. "You'll probably feel a little rough for a couple of days." Falk was a force options expert, an authority in police defensive tactics and applied use of force, and a wide variety of experience in various aspects of the psychology of police combat. He had also said exactly the same thing to Quinn after the school shooting. "You write up your portion of the incident and then go home. Don't worry about giving the formal statement right away. You can do it tomorrow. If those pricks for major crime give you any flack for it, you send them to me." "Thanks, Staff." Quinn used his electronic fob to open the magnetically locked back door of the detachment and walked inside. The office was a long, red brick rectangle with a flat tin roof the color of mashed peas. A cell block, small concrete shoeboxes with uncomfortable bunks built into the walls and steel doors, sat to the right of the rear entrance. He stopped for a long moment and looked into the 5 empty cells. "You all right, Quinn?" Rafe asked as he came through the door behind him. Quinn turned his head and looked at the bigger man, and then back at the cells. "I was thinking of all the times I'd brought Scooby in here." The homeless man had been a regular guest of the Queen, and had enjoyed the hospitality of her jail on the occasions when he had too much to drink, or when the weather was too cold for sleeping outside and the shelter refused to take him. "Makes me wonder how he got where he was," Quinn said. "Was he always off his nut, or did he have a life before Resolution?" Rafe folded his arms across his massive chest and leaned on the door jamb. "I heard he was a high school English teacher, which is probably where he learned all that poetry and Shakespeare bullshit that he was always yelling about. Went nuts in the early 90s, schizophrenia, and lost his job." "Does he have any family? Someone should try and call them." Rafe nodded. "He's got adult children on the island somewhere. I saw a few names in his medical records as emergency contacts when I took him to the hospital for an assessment once. I'll talk to the major crime guys, see if they're willing to do anything besides ask you foolish questions." Quinn nodded. He had taken Scooby to the hospital when Scooby had an especially bad episode, more than once himself. Always they had medicated and released him, stating he was not a danger to anyone and that they did not have to have the space to keep him. The staff at the hospital were right about one thing. Scooby was not a danger to anyone. Quinn would have never thought he had it in him to intentionally hurt someone's feelings, let alone try and kill a bunch of people. Being a street cop for almost 6 years gave Quinn fairly good instincts and a reasonable ability to judge character. He was sure it was not in Scooby to do what he had done. Quinn had to wonder what drove him to it. He turned away from the cell block and walked down a short hallway to the general duty pit, the area where the constables did their paperwork and kept their working files. Sandy Harding, the lone woman on Quinn's team, sat at her desk typing rapidly. When Quinn walked into the room, she looked up at him and spun her chair away from her computer. "How you doing?" she asked, her brown eyes wide, her slender face turned down in a look of concern. "I feel like I've been drugged through a knothole backwards," he said as he ran a hand over his clean-shaven face and dropped into a chair. "I still can't believe this happened," she said, as she pushed a stray strand of her brown hair over her ear. "Out of all the people running around the streets of Resolution, Scooby was the last one I ever thought would do something like this." Quinn nodded in agreement. "I can't believe it either. I can't believe I had to kill a man I honestly liked. I've been working it over in my head and it doesn't make any sense. I've been here for 2 years and I've never seen Scooby get violent with anyone. People would get scared of him, sure, when he was arguing with trees in the park or yelling at that stuffed toy of his, but he would never hurt another person, I'm sure of it." "No," Quinn said, "he wouldn't. But he certainly did today." Rafe stood at the entrance of the pit, his bulk filling the hallway. The next watch had taken over scene security while the forensic identification units plaza out the scene. The major crime guys want to have a debriefing. Boardroom. Now. Quinn and Sandy stood from their desks and followed Rafe down the hallway into the detachment boardroom. Sitting at the wide hardwood table was Dave McLeod, his angular form bent over his notebook. Staff Sergeant Steve Falk, the sergeant from Major Crime and his entourage, and the detachment commander, Inspector Donald Green. "Have a seat, Quincy," Inspector Green said with his broad political smile. He was the only one who ever called Quinn that, and Quinn hated it, but Green was not the kind of man you corrected. Inspector Green wore the white shirt, the uniform of the commissioned officer of the RCMP, but had stopped being a cop years ago. The short, rapidly balding man had made a stark transition from police officer to politician once he'd been given his commission and made a detachment commander. The welfare of his members and the general public came a distant second to his polished image and aspirations for a political career once he was done his policing service. He was either ignored or despised by his members, and it was widely known that Steve Falk was the one who actually ran the detachment. "I want to commend you and McLeod on your actions today. Nicely done. But could you break fewer windows next time? That's going to come out of my budget." Green chuckled at his own attempt at a joke, but no one else at the table laughed. There was nothing funny that Quinn could see. Green looked around, cleared his throat, and put his serious face back on. "This is Sergeant Bill Davis, from the Major Crime Section in Nanaimo," he said, indicating the sergeant who had spoken to Quinn. "Sergeant, give us what you have so far." Green leaned back and grinned, apparently extremely pleased with himself. He loved having something serious to preside over, whether he knew what he was talking about or not. Davis opened his ledger-sized black notebook and scanned the page. "Okay, we've got John Charles, a.k.a. Scooby, with an extensive history of mental health issues and arrest for being drunk in public. The witnesses we talked to at scene said he was walking around the parking lot of the mall, agitated, talking to himself, and being aggressive with people. They all confirmed that when the police showed up to address his behavior, he started firing at Constable Sullivan without provocation. The gun we found on him is in a very expensive Glock with a whole mess of modifications to it. The serial number has been taken off with an acid drip, so we can't trace its point of origin. We pulled several intact slugs out of the crime scene, especially Constable Sullivan's car," he nodded at Quinn, "and we're going to check them against similar bullets from the previous investigations, see if it was used anywhere else. I've also talked to the medical examiner. An autopsy will be done on Charles tomorrow so we can find out what drugs were in the system." "You won't find any," Quinn broke in. Sergeant Davis frowned at the interruption. "What?" "Scooby didn't use drugs," Dave said. His blue eyes narrowed in challenge. "He was a drunk, but in the 4 years I've been here, he never once used any drugs." Davis shook his head. "I don't buy it. This has all the earmarks of a classic drug psychosis, and I guarantee you there will be drugs in that man's system. Likely methamphetamine, unless I miss my guess. According to the Constable Sullivan's account, the suspect was shot several times in the upper body. The initial examination of the corpse confirms this. You don't see a man shrug that off without a whole lot of chemical assistance. Deny it if you want, but this freak was taking a ride on the chemical superhighway." Quinn shook his head and looked to Rafe. The big corporal nodded and waved Quinn down. Rafe knew Scooby as well as anyone there and shared the opinion that he was not a drug user. Davis slipped through his notebook for some more. "That's about all we have right now. We'll need to wait for the medical examiner's report and the members' statements before we can conclude this investigation. But I think we'll find that Constable Sullivan and Constable McLeod used appropriate force given the circumstances." Inspector Green stood up and gripped Davis's hand. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'll look forward to reading your final report." He straightened and addressed all at the table. "Any other questions?" Quinn considered, for a moment, asking Davis why he was such an asshole, but decided against it. No one else spoke. "Good," Inspector Green said, grinning as he turned to leave. Sir," Steve Falk said, haunting the commander's departure, "I think, in light of the 2 traumatic incidents that have happened recently, involving both McLeod and Sullivan, it would be appropriate for them to have some time off to recuperate and see the force psychologist." The inspector frowned. "Well, I suppose I could find it in the budget to call in members on overtime to cover their shifts tomorrow. I was thinking the rest of the block, at the very least. This block and the next would be more appropriate. For the health of members." "Sir." Inspector Green's frown deepened. The watches worked in periods of time called blocks, made up of 2-day shifts followed by 2 night shifts, and then 4 days off. Falk was asking for a fairly sizable chunk of time. Quinn was sure the inspector was going to say no and send them back to work. "It's only appropriate," Falk said, looking at the inspector evenly. Green looked at Falk for several long moments, then at Quinn and Dave, and the other occupants of the room, all of whom were looking back at him. Finally, he nodded. "Well, let's start out with this block and see how they feel come next week. You go ahead and find the body, Steve, and I'll approve the overtime. Go home, boys. We'll see you next week." Green left the boardroom and headed towards his office, head down and grumbling to himself about the budget. Falk gripped Quinn's shoulder. "Bang off your report, send it to Davis. I'll make you an appointment with the head shrinker, and I expect you to go." He looked at Dave. "That means you too, McLeod. I don't want to see either of you shit disturbers in this office until next week at the very earliest. Understood?" "Yes, staff," both men said in unison. Quinn and Dave went back to the pit and signed onto the ancient office computers. The machines clicked and sputtered like an old Buick, but slowly came to life. Quinn logged into the new RCMP reporting system called Prime, which was as user-friendly as a rabid dog, and most members referred to as the work of the devil. He located the shooting file in the database and added a long occurrence report detailing his action. While he typed, he kept thinking of Scooby. He thought mostly about how maniacal the man's face had looked while he was trying to reload a gun he never should have had. It was a look that transcended his normal comical lunacy and reached a whole new level. It was as if Scooby was not there anymore. It was like someone else was wearing his face. A decrepit Honda, with large patches of rust above the wheel wells and spewing black smoke, sputtered to a stop in front of a run-down rancher-style house in the southeast part of Resolution. Brandon Williams sat behind the wheel of the dilapidated car and studied the house nervously. Brandon twitched and shook in the driver's seat. It was not just nerves that caused his body to betray him, but the painful and driving need that accompanied drug addiction. He had gone for almost 30 hours without shooting up, and he was in the deep grips of a burning withdrawal. He had phoned every dealer he knew, and they all refused to extend him any more credit, most demanding to know where he was because they already owed him a great deal of money. He had gone to his mother's house to ask for another loan. She had refused and picked up the phone to call the police when he grew angry at her refusal, forcing him to flee. As a last resort, he had called Joe Rabowski and drove to the house where the drug dealer had been squatting. Most of the junkies in Resolution avoided Rabowski if they could. It was not his drugs that were the problem. He was always carrying and his stuff was good. It was the guy himself that no one wanted anything to do with. Rabowski was crazy, even by the standards of a drug dealer. He was prone to sudden fits of irrational violence and was rumored to have killed several people, although the cops had never caught him once. Rabowski had done 7 years in a federal prison, and it only served to make him meaner, crazier, and more unpredictable. For a moment, Brandon considered restarting his car and driving away. But he was in a bad way, and Rabowski had agreed to help him out. He would not give Brandon any credit, but he said it had some work that needed to be done around the house, and Brandon could have a fix and trade. Brandon was at the point where he agreed to almost anything to get his hands on a dime bag. With a deep breath, he opened his car door and walked up to the dingy house. His anxiety heightened as he walked up the concrete steps to the front door. The house had a decidedly menacing feel, as though it had a personality all its own, and it was as mean as its occupant. He knew it was only his imagination, but it felt like the air got colder as he stepped closer to the house. He thought, once more, of turning away and going back to his car, but his need drove him forward, the urgency getting more abysmal with each passing moment. He lifted a hand and knocked on the door's peeling paint. After a few moments, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. There was a pause, then an angry voice. "Who the fuck is that?" the voice demanded. It's Brandon, Joe. I talked to you a while ago?" The door flew open, yanked from the inside. Rabowski stood in the dirty entry, shirtless, wearing faded blue jeans and battered work boots. His thick upper body was covered in black jailhouse tattoos, including the crown of his shaved head. There was a silver shotgun in his hand, and Brandon eyed it fearfully. "You're late," Rabowski said. "You were supposed to be here half an hour ago." "Sorry, Joe," Brandon said, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his dirty corduroys. "I had a hard time finding the place." "Bullshit. You just can't trust junkies." Brandon made no reply and stood looking down at his feet. "Fuck, whatever. Just get in here." I've got lots of shit to do, and I haven't got all day. Grabowski turned from the door and walked down a short hallway and into a filthy kitchen. Brandon followed, reluctant, as he looked around. As he stepped in the kitchen, he saw a small round table with a glitter finish, a throwback to the early 70s. On the table lay a hand of very small bags containing an off-white powder. Any misgivings he might have felt about Grabowski or his shitty house were instantly forgotten. Looking at the bags, Brandon's mouth began to water. I've got some shit in the basement that needs to be cleaned up, Grabowski said, pointing to an open door beside the fridge and a set of wooden stairs leading down. Brandon continued to stare at the small bags. Well? Grabowski asked, gesturing down the stairs. Move your ass. Joe? Brandon said, looking from the bags to his feet and back at the bags again. You said I could have a taste first. Did I say that? Grabowski asked, folding his arms. Would I give you the stuff first without getting any work out of you? Brandon could not bring himself to look at the tattooed man and looked at the ground. That's what you said, Joe. Grabowski rubbed his stubbly chin and looked at the ceiling, contemplating. Brandon could still not look at him, though, but he could feel the man's smirk. He was enjoying this thoroughly. All right, Twitchy, Grabowski said after several moments. I guess a man's only as good as his word, but hurry the fuck up, for Christ's sakes. I'm a busy man and I can't wait around for you all day. Brandon nodded eagerly and sat in one of the battered chairs by the table. He reached into the pocket of his grungy jean and produced a stained spoon, a lighter, and a dirty syringe. He snatched one of the bags off the table and shook the contents in the bowl with a spoon, and heated it with a lighter. Once the contents liquefied, he filled the syringe, rolled up his sleeve of his jacket, and jabbed the needle into his scabby arm. He let his head fall back as the heroin hit his nervous system, and he moaned softly. Instantly, all of his worries and anxiety were gone. Joe Grabowski's intimidation and his creepy fucking house disappeared and were replaced by the golden haze of the drug. If he could have a place to lie down, this would be perfect. Grabowski, arms still crossed, leaned against the wall and tapped his foot impatiently. He cast several glances over his shoulder, down the murky hallway, but only when he thought Brandon was... He cast several glances over his shoulder, down the murky stairwell, but only when he thought Brandon wasn't looking at him. Okay, Twitchy, Grabowski said. It's time for you to earn your keep. Come on. Smiling, Brandon stood from the chair, recapped his syringe, and pocketed his tools. He eyed Grabowski, who suddenly did not look quite so tough. He probably had all those tattoos so people wouldn't think he was gay, Brandon thought to himself and giggled. What the fuck are you laughing at? Huh? Oh, nothing, Joe. Good. Now get your ass to work. Whatever you say, man, Brandon said agreeably, and walked slowly down towards the stairway. Grabowski led the way down the rickety stairs. He flicked a light switch on, and a dusty 60-watt bulb flickered in a sagging bracket attached to a ceiling joist. The room smelled like old socks and wet garbage, and Brandon wrinkled his nose in annoyance. The floor of the basement was packed dirt. The foundation walls were made of old-fashioned stone or mortar instead of poured concrete, and support beams were rough-sawn timbers. One of the beams had a mining company stamp on it. Grabowski looked back up the stairs at Brandon. What the fuck are you doing now? Brandon stopped, running his fingers through the blackened lettering burned into the wood. What? Oh, I was just looking at the stamp. This wood must have been stolen from a mining site back in the gold rush. The house is probably more than 100 years old. My mom was telling me how the miners used to take stuff. I don't need your cunt mother's fucking history lesson. You've got work to do. Grabowski stepped aside so Brandon could come down the steps and pointed into the recesses of the basement. The small light bulb cast a weak circle of light, and the room beyond the stairs was dark. A queer feeling poked at Brandon through the warm haze of the drugs as he stepped off the stairs. A chill that wanted to crawl up his spine and send him running. The bad feelings that permeated the rest of this house were doubly potent in this damp basement, and had he not been high, he would have been quaking with terror. He frowned as his imagination tried to get the best of him to ruin his buzz. He shook it off and glanced at Grabowski. Brandon wanted to get this job over with as quickly as possible so he could find a quiet spot to lay up and enjoy his ride. Over there, man, Grabowski said, pointing to a pile of debris in the far corner of the basement, away from the light. I want you to take all that stuff upstairs and throw it in the alley. Brandon nodded and started towards the pile of what looked like rags. He slowed his steps as he realized that Grabowski still stood on the bottom of the stairs and had not left the small circle of light. He wasn't taking one step further into the basement than he had to. Again, there was a voice in Brandon's head yelling at him to run like his ass was on fire, but he ignored it. A deal was a deal, after all. He would keep his part and get the job done. He got within 2 steps of the pile and stopped. A feeling, dark and terrible, slashed through his euphoria and gripped him so hard that it squeezed the breath out of him. He looked around frantically, searching for the source of his fear. It took another moment for him to realize that the pile in front of him had a distinctly humanoid shape, and 2 sharp red eyes peering at him from out of the tumbled folds of rags. Brendan turned to run, a scream burbling up his throat, but before he could take a single step, the thing in the corner surged up from the floor and grasped him around the shoulders. Brendan tried to scream, but a massive hand, covered in hair and rough skin, clamped over his mouth and sucked him back against a gnarled body. He had time to register the stench of rotting flesh and the sound of Robowski's insane laughter before he was spun around to stare into those 2 awful red eyes. It took almost 4 hours to complete the necessary documentation, speak to a division rep on the phone, and give his formal statement to the major crime members. When finished, Quinn Sullivan was utterly spent. He looked over the top of his small cubicle and saw Dave rubbing his eyes wearily. "You all done?" Quinn asked. "Yeah. You?" "Just finished." "Burgers and beers?" Dave looked down at his watch and twisted his mouth in consideration. I better not. Jackie has called me every 20 minutes asking me if I'm okay, and she'll be waiting for me. I better get home before she either has a massive coronary and all my shit ends up on the front lawn." Quinn nodded and stood up, curling his thick arms over his head in a stretch. "I'll be at Kelly's if you change your mind." Dave grinned. "I wouldn't have thought any different." Kelly's pub was where the members of Resolution Detachment went for watch parties or to drink off a bad day or to hide from their spouses. Owned by Sam Kelly, a retired sergeant, the establishment was especially welcoming police, firefighters, paramedics, and anyone who could stand to listen to their stories about mangled dead bodies. It was also where the object of Quinn's affection, Carrie Dawson, worked. Quinn changed out of his uniform and into civilian clothing, walked out the back door of the detachment, and down the 2 blocks to Kelly's. It was just after 7 o'clock, and the parking lot was mostly full of the vehicles of various emergency workers who had finished their day shifts. It was a Sea-Watch swing shift, the period between day shift and switching over to night shifts, and the bar would be filled with familiar faces. Resolution was a small community. Everyone knew who the cops were and word traveled around among the group of people who worked so closely together. Everyone in the bar would know that Quinn had been forced to kill another man that day. Conversations quieted when Quinn walked through the front door and he could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room trained on him. A table of firefighters near the door nodded to him and asked how he was doing. Quinn nodded and made his best attempt at a smile as he walked past them, and several hands patted him on the back. Gradually, as he walked through the room and tried not to be noticed, people resumed their conversations or continued yelling at the Canucks on the big screen television. Quinn sat down at the bar, and Sam Kelly, a broad-shouldered man with a heavy protruding gut, set a pint of dark beer in front of him. "Rough day, Quinn?" Quinn nodded and took a sip of the beer, letting it run slowly down his throat. "Yeah, a little. Can't be easy. I worked almost 40 years and never once had to fire my piece at anyone." Quinn nodded and looked around. "Is Carrie here?" Sam Kelly grinned and lifted his chin towards the back of the room. Quinn turned on a stool and saw Carrie, setting drinks on a table surrounded by young men, probably students at the local community college. Several of them were eyeing Carrie with obvious interest. "Did those hurt?" asked one of them, pointing out the colorful tattoos that were visible on her upper arms. "They only hurt if you're a little bitch," she replied, eliciting a burst of laughter from the questioner's friends. "I wonder if she's got more anywhere else," another said, and reached out to lift up the back of Carrie's t-shirt from her curving hips. Quinn stood from the stool and started across the room, but there was no need for his intervention. Carrie dropped her tray on the table, yanked the boy's arm out straight, grabbed the back of his neck, and slammed his face into a plate of French fries. "Keep your hands to yourself, shithead. I'll break out your fucking arm. Understand?" The boy nodded as much as he could with Carrie's elbow digging into the side of his face. "Good." She stood, letting him up, flashing him her biggest smile. "Enjoy your dinner." She grabbed her tray off the table and turned, flipping her long, straight black hair over her shoulder. The other boys at the table hooted and clapped, as the one who grabbed Carrie rubbed his face sullenly. Carrie walked across the room, her dark blue eyes fixed on Quinn, her smile getting bigger. She trotted the last 2 steps, dropped her tray on the bar, and threw her arms around Quinn's neck. He hugged her back, drawing several jealous glares from tables around the bar. Quinn really wasn't sure why she liked him, especially since the first time he'd met her, he had been drunk at his watch welcoming party and had puked behind the pinball machine before asking her out. But he was smart enough to know that some things should not be questioned too closely, lest you find answers you didn't like. When she finally let him go, she grabbed his face in both her hands. "How you doing, baby?" she asked. I'm okay. It's just been a rough day. Is there anything I can do for you?" He shook his head and looked over the table with the university boys. "Those guys giving you a hard time?" She laughed. "Yeah, were you coming to defend my honor?" "Doesn't look like you needed defending." "Those are quite the moves you got." She shrugged. "The places I've worked, you pick up a few things." Carrie had left home early, in a rebellious stage, trying to get away from her parents, and has spent a few years waitressing and maybe stripping in small clubs. "You'll have to tell me about that sometime," Quinn said. Carrie rolled her eyes. Her time outside of resolution was not a topic that was open for discussion. Whenever Quinn brought it up, she changed the subject or shut him down. "Anyway," she said, "I talked to Uncle Sam. He said he could do without me tonight. My mom was looking after Sean. You can come crash at my place if you want." "How is your little man doing, anyway?" "He's good. He keeps asking when you're coming back to take us out for pancakes again." Quinn laughed. Carrie's 6-year-old son, Sean, had a love for pancakes that bordered on obsession. "Let him know I'll take him and his mom out any time they want to go." Quinn leaned into Quinn and grabbed the lapels of his coat, pressing up against him. "So, how about it? You want to come over?" I don't know if we'll be great company tonight. I've got a lot of stuff spinning around in my skull." "That's exactly why you should come over," she said, and bit her full bottom lip. "I'll tire you out and make sure your head is clear so you can sleep." Quinn smiled. "I don't think I can argue with that." That is the end of Chapter 1. Next time, we'll have Chapter 2. As always, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.